What happens the first 7 days after death? The mystery of life after death. Have you ever wondered what happens after we die? We live our lives day in and day out, chasing dreams, building relationships, and making memories. But at the end of it all, where do we go? Is there something more after this life? Or does it all just stop? You're not alone in asking this question. Throughout history, humans from every culture, religion, and philosophy have tried to understand what happens after death. Some believe in an eternal afterlife, others in reincarnation, and some, well, they think nothing at all happens. The mystery is endless. But here's something that we don't talk about enough. What happens in the first 7 days after death? The time immediately following the final breath is shrouded in mystery, and yet, it's a period that might hold the key to unlocking our deepest questions about life, death, and everything in between. I've often thought about this. What does the body go through after we die? Where does the mind or soul go? Is there a transition? Or do we just fade into nothingness? In today's video, we're diving deep into this very mystery. From the moment the heart stops beating to the 7 days that follow, we'll explore the physical changes, the possible spiritual journeys, and the emotional impact on those left behind. We're going to uncover the science, the spirituality, and the unanswered questions that continue to haunt us. So, whether you believe in an afterlife, are skeptical about it, or just curious to understand what happens next, stick with me. Let's unravel this mystery together, one day at a time, starting with the first 7 days after death. Let's get into it. Part 1. What happens to the body? Physical changes in the first 7 days. The moment we take our last breath, we cross a threshold from life into what comes next. But what happens to our body in those first moments after death? There's no way to avoid it. The body begins to change, and the process is fast and intense. It's almost as if the body knows it's no longer needed, and so, it begins to return to the earth, piece by piece. Let's start at the very beginning. The heart stops, and within moments, everything changes. The immediate moments after death. The moment the heart stops beating, oxygen is no longer being pumped to the brain. It's like the final switch gets turned off. Within seconds, the brain stops its activity, and we lose consciousness completely. But that's just the beginning. Once the heart stops, the body starts to cool. This process is called algor mortis, or post-mortem cooling. The body, once warm and full of life, begins to feel cold to the touch. The cooling rate is dependent on various factors: the room temperature, the clothing of the person, and their environment. In general, the body cools about 1.5 degrees per hour for the first 12 hours. Imagine the body that was once full of warmth and energy now turning cold, but there's more going on inside the body than just cooling. The body has already begun to break down. Autolysis, or self-digestion, starts happening almost immediately. Essentially, the cells in your body start to eat themselves. Why? Because with the absence of oxygen, the cells can no longer maintain their structure, so they begin to rupture and release enzymes that start the decomposition process. It's strange, isn't it? This idea that we, who lived so fully, can start to fall apart in just a matter of hours. The body begins the inevitable process of returning to the earth, breaking down into its simplest components. And for those who are left behind, it's a strange and unsettling thing to witness. What was once a living, breathing person, full of thoughts and emotions, is now just a vessel, slowly fading away. Day 1 today. 3. The early stages of decomposition. By the time the first day has passed, the body begins to undergo more dramatic changes. At this point, you'll start to notice the skin losing its natural color. The face may become pale or grayish, the skin may look waxy, and the eyes may become clouded or sunken. This is the beginning of what's called livor mortis, the pooling of blood in the lowest parts of the body. Gravity pulls the blood down into the tissues, creating dark patches of discoloration. It's not just the external appearance of the body that's changing. On the inside, the real process of decomposition has begun. Bacterial activity starts to play a major role. Within the first 24-48 hours, bacteria in the gut start to multiply, breaking down the tissues and releasing gases in the process. These gases build up inside the body, causing it to swell. The once healthy, vibrant skin that held the body together starts to lose its elasticity, and the soft tissues begin to break apart. This process is disturbing, no doubt. But it's also humbling when you think about it. Our bodies, no matter how advanced, how intelligent, or how full of life, are still made of flesh and bone, destined to return to the earth. Our bodies are a temporary vessel, but the elements that make us up, oxygen, carbon, and other elements, will continue to exist. We return to the very material that helped create us. Day 4 to day 7, accelerated decomposition. By the time day 4 rolls around, things have escalated. The bacterial breakdown of the body continues to progress rapidly, and this leads to the release of more gases, which causes more swelling and bloating. The skin may begin to tear, and the internal organs start to disintegrate. The body will emit a distinct, often unpleasant odor, a smell that signals the completion of the decomposition process. The breakdown of tissues doesn't stop here. By the 7th day, the body is well into the process of decomposition. This is where the body begins to literally fall apart, turning into the elements that once formed it. What was once a coherent, organized structure now disintegrates, with the body becoming a feast for scavengers like insects and bacteria. And yet, there's something oddly poetic about it. While it's unsettling to think of a body breaking down in this way, it also marks a return to the natural cycle. It's the earth reclaiming what it gave us in the first place. We came from the earth, and eventually, we return to it. Part 2. The mind after death. What happens to consciousness? Now, the body is undergoing its inevitable transformation, but what about the mind, the essence of who we are? What happens to our thoughts, our consciousness, our very soul after death? This question has puzzled scientists, philosophers, and religious figures for millennia. And while we may never truly know the answer, there are several fascinating perspectives to explore. Scientific perspective. The end of consciousness. From a scientific standpoint, the moment the heart stops and the brain ceases its activity, consciousness fades away. Our ability to think, feel, and perceive disappears as brain activity shuts down. The neocortex, which is responsible for higher cognitive functions like thinking, reasoning, and memory, completely stops working. Without blood flow and oxygen, the brain can no longer function. The brain essentially turns off, and with it, so do our thoughts. But does that mean we're truly gone? Or is there something more? Near-death experiences, NDEs. A glimpse of the afterlife? This is where things get interesting. We've all heard about near-death experiences, or NDEs. Those moments when people have been clinically dead, only to come back to life and recount vivid experiences of what they saw or felt during their time on the other side. People who've experienced NDEs often report similar phenomena: feelings of peace, a bright light, the sensation of floating above their body, and sometimes even encounters with deceased loved ones or spiritual beings. These accounts are strikingly similar across cultures and religions. What does this mean? Could it be evidence of an afterlife? Could these experiences be glimpses into something beyond our physical existence? Some scientists argue that NDEs are simply a result of brain activity during trauma. When the brain is starved of oxygen, it may produce these sensations. Others, particularly those with spiritual beliefs, see NDEs as proof of a higher reality, an existence beyond the physical world. As much as the scientific community wants to explain NDEs away, the truth is, we don't have all the answers. Some people believe that these experiences hint at the continuation of the soul's journey after death, while others think they're just part of the brain's attempt to cope with the shock of death. Either way, it's a reminder that there's more to the story than we can fully grasp. Part 3. The mind after death. What happens to consciousness? Now that we've explored what happens to the body, let's turn our attention to the mind, the very essence of who we are. What happens to the mind after death? This question is one that has intrigued humanity for centuries. Are we more than just our physical bodies, or are we simply the product of a series of chemical reactions? Scientific perspective: the end of consciousness. From a scientific standpoint, when the heart stops and the brain ceases to function, consciousness fades away. The brain needs oxygen and blood flow to sustain itself, and once those are cut off, the neurons can no longer fire, and the mind essentially shuts down. At the moment of death, the neocortex, the part of the brain responsible for thought, reason, and memory, stops. The electrical signals in the brain, which once carried our thoughts and memories, are no longer active. It's a stark, clinical end to consciousness. However, there's an intriguing possibility that this process is not as clear-cut as it seems. Many people who have survived near-death experiences, NDEs, describe feeling more alive than ever before, even while their bodies were clinically dead. Some report a sense of floating outside their bodies, moving through a tunnel, or encountering bright lights. Others claim they spoke with deceased loved ones, or even experienced profound spiritual or religious visions. This brings us to a question that science cannot yet fully explain. Could there be something more to consciousness than just the brain? Near-death experiences, NDEs. A glimpse of the afterlife. Let's talk about near-death experiences, or NDEs. These are experiences that people have when they're declared clinically dead, but later revived. NDEs often involve incredibly vivid sensations, an overwhelming sense of peace, a sense of floating above the body, seeing a bright light, or even meeting deceased loved ones. What's fascinating is that many people who have had NDEs report strikingly similar experiences, regardless of culture, religion, or background. Now, the scientific community has some explanations for these experiences. Some believe NDEs occur because of a lack of oxygen in the brain, causing hallucinations. Others think that the brain's neurons are still firing in certain areas, leading to the vivid imagery and sensations people describe. But what if there's more to it than that? What if these experiences offer a glimpse into something beyond our physical world? There are people who believe that these experiences are not just products of a dying brain, but are glimpses of an afterlife or spiritual realm. The common thread in many NDEs is the feeling of absolute peace and love, as if the person has come in contact with something greater than themselves. Is this the soul's journey into the next phase of existence? Or is it just a comforting illusion produced by a struggling brain? The truth is, we don't know. But one thing is clear: death and consciousness are far more complex than we can fully understand. And the mystery remains: what truly happens to the mind after death? Part 4. Cultural and religious views on life after death. Death, as universal as it is, has been interpreted in countless ways throughout history. Every culture, religion, and philosophy has its own take on what happens after we die. These diverse perspectives offer comfort, hope, and sometimes even fear, but they all share one common theme: an enduring belief in something beyond the physical realm. Christian perspective: heaven, hell, and the judgment day. In Christianity, the idea of the afterlife is central. When someone dies, their soul is believed to undergo judgment. For those who have lived according to God's will, they are rewarded with eternal life in heaven, a place of peace and happiness. However, for those who have turned away from God's teachings, the consequences are far more dire: eternal damnation in hell. The first 7 days after death are especially significant in Christian belief. It's said that the soul is temporarily in a state of waiting, sometimes referred to as the intermediate state, until the final judgment. Some Christians believe that this period is one of reflection, while others think it marks the soul's first encounter with the divine or with the consequences of their earthly actions. For Christians, the afterlife is not just a continuation of life as we know it, but a complete transformation, a move to a state of existence that's either eternal bliss or eternal suffering. Buddhist and Hindu perspectives, reincarnation and samsara. In Buddhism and Hinduism, death is not seen as the end, but as a transition. Both religions teach the idea of samsara, the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. In this view, death is just another stage in the journey of the soul. For Buddhists, the first 7 days after death are a time of transition, where the soul is guided toward its next rebirth. The process of reincarnation is influenced by one's karma, the sum of their actions in past lives. If a person has lived a life full of compassion and good deeds, they may be reborn into a better life. However, if they have lived selfishly or harmed others, they may be reborn into less fortunate circumstances. Hindus also believe in reincarnation, but they see it as a cycle that can eventually be broken through the attainment of moksha, or liberation. The first 7 days after death may be spent in the process of shedding the past life's attachments before the soul moves on to the next life. For those on the path to moksha, the soul is not reborn, but instead reaches a state of ultimate peace and union with the divine. Spiritual perspectives. The journey of the soul. In many spiritual traditions, the first 7 days after death are seen as crucial for the soul's journey. Some believe that during this time, the soul is still very much connected to the physical world and may linger near the body or the loved ones they've left behind. This belief is particularly prevalent in cultures that emphasize ancestor worship, where rituals and ceremonies are performed to help guide the soul to the afterlife. For example, in some African spiritual practices, the first week after death is spent honoring the deceased, offering prayers, and making sure the soul is properly prepared for its journey to the next realm. The soul's transition is viewed as a sacred, necessary process that must be facilitated with care and respect. Part 5. The Afterlife. What could happen in the first 7 days? Now that we've explored what happens to the body and mind, let's take a closer look at the spiritual journey that may unfold in the first 7 days after death. This is where the mystery deepens. Transition of the soul. Where does it go? In many cultures, the first 7 days after death are considered a time when the soul is transitioning, not fully gone, but not fully present in the physical world either. This liminal period, where the soul is said to be neither here nor there, is often marked by spiritual rituals to ensure that the soul finds its way to the afterlife. Some traditions believe that the soul's journey begins almost immediately. In Christianity, this is often thought of as a period of judgment. In many indigenous beliefs, the soul may take a journey through different realms, guided by ancestors or spirits, until it reaches its final resting place. The 7-day journey. A waiting period? In some traditions, the 7th day holds significant importance. For example, in Chinese culture, the 7th day after death is believed to be when the soul is fully freed from the body. It's said to be a time when the soul can finally move on to the next realm, or even reincarnate. In other cultures, the first 7 days are a time of reflection, for the deceased to consider their actions during their life. This period is believed to influence their next destination in the afterlife, whether that's an eternity in heaven, rebirth, or something else. Personal insight. The role of the soul in the afterlife. What do you believe happens to the soul in those first 7 days? Is it a time of rest, reflection, or transition? For me, I think about how much we still don't understand about death. It seems so final, but we continue to ask questions. We wonder, and we hope, that the soul doesn't just fade away. Instead, perhaps it's on a journey, one that we will only truly understand when our time comes. Part 6. The mystery of life after death. Unsolved questions. As we've learned, there are many theories about what happens after we die, physical, mental, and spiritual. But there's still so much that remains a mystery. While science can explain the physical changes in the body, and religion and culture offer us explanations about the soul's journey, the ultimate truth remains elusive. What if the mystery of life after death isn't meant to be solved? What if part of the beauty of life is that it keeps us searching, questioning, and seeking answers? Maybe that's the point. To explore the unknown, what happens in those first 7 days, we may never know for sure. But the mystery is something that will continue to fascinate and haunt us, reminding us that life is temporary, but the questions we have about death and what comes after will endure forever. Part 7. The emotional and psychological impact of death on the living. While the focus of this video has largely been on the physical and spiritual transitions that occur after death, there's another powerful side to this mystery: the emotional and psychological impact on those who are left behind. Death doesn't just affect the body, it profoundly affects the living. Grief, a journey of loss. The death of a loved one brings a unique kind of pain, one that words often fail to describe. Grief isn't a linear process, and it isn't the same for everyone. For some, it's a quiet ache, while for others, it's an overwhelming tidal wave of emotions. After someone dies, the first few days, and indeed the first week, are filled with a whirlwind of emotions. It's a time of disbelief, confusion, and sorrow. Sometimes we struggle with the notion that the person we loved so deeply is really gone. It's hard to accept that a person who was once so full of life is now just a memory, a presence that lingers but is no longer physically here. This emotional process is what we call grief, and it manifests in different ways. The first few days after death are when grief can feel the sharpest. We may experience a range of emotions: shock, numbness, sadness, even anger. The mind is trying to make sense of the loss, and it often takes time to fully accept the reality of death. The stages of grief. According to psychologist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, there are 5 stages of grief that people typically go through: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. While these stages don't always occur in a specific order, they represent the emotional hurdles people must navigate after the death of a loved one. Denial. The initial reaction to death might be disbelief. The mind might refuse to accept the loss, pretending that the person isn't truly gone. Anger. As reality starts to set in, it's common to feel anger. Anger at the deceased for leaving, anger at the world for taking them away, or even anger at oneself. Bargaining. People may make deals with a higher power, hoping to undo the loss or asking for the deceased to come back. Depression. As the weight of loss becomes too much to bear, feelings of sadness and despair can take over. It can feel like the world has lost its meaning without that person. Acceptance. Eventually, as time goes on, we reach a place of acceptance, not in a way that makes the loss any easier, but in a way that allows us to continue living, knowing that the person will always be a part of us. The role of rituals and memorials. One of the ways humans cope with death is through rituals and memorials. For many, these traditions provide a sense of closure and a way to honor the deceased. Whether it's a funeral, a wake, or a simple gathering of family and friends, these ceremonies allow us to come together, share our grief, and celebrate the life of the person who's passed. In some cultures, memorials can last for weeks, months, or even years. The first 7 days after death are often especially significant, as this time is used to say goodbye, mark the transition, and offer prayers for the soul of the deceased. Through these rituals, the living can process their grief, find comfort in the company of others, and feel connected to the deceased, even as they face the overwhelming pain of loss. The psychological effects of death, coping with uncertainty. The psychological impact of death doesn't just end with the funeral. In fact, the death of a loved one can have long-lasting effects on a person's mental health. Some may experience post-traumatic stress or complicated grief, which is an intense form of grief that can make it difficult to move forward. Moreover, there is also the psychological impact of facing our own mortality. Death reminds us that life is fragile, and it can cause us to reflect on the meaning and purpose of our own existence. For some, this reflection leads to a deeper understanding of life, while for others, it can bring about existential anxiety. The question of what happens after death is not just a question for the deceased, it's a question for the living too. As we face the loss of someone we love, we're forced to confront our own mortality, and that can be both deeply unsettling and eye-opening. Part 8. The Mystery of Life After Death, Unsolved Questions. As we reach the final part of this journey, we have to face an undeniable truth. We don't have all the answers. No matter how much we delve into science, religion, or philosophy, the mystery of life after death remains largely unsolved. And perhaps that's what makes it so powerful. Is there more to life after death? We've explored various perspectives, from the biological breakdown of the body to the psychological impact of death on the living, and the spiritual journeys that many believe begin once we pass away. But what happens in the first 7 days after death? What happens to the soul, to consciousness, and to those who are left behind? We've talked about near-death experiences, religious beliefs, and scientific explanations. But the truth is, no one knows for sure. Some people believe that death is simply the end, that once we're gone, that's it. Others believe that the soul continues on in some form, either entering an afterlife or being reincarnated into a new body. And some argue that death is just a transition into another state of being, one that we can't yet comprehend. Why the mystery matters. So why does the mystery of life after death matter? Why do we spend so much time pondering what happens when we die? Maybe it's because death isn't just about the end of life. It's about the way we live. The question of what happens after death forces us to reflect on how we spend our time here on Earth. It reminds us that our lives are finite, and with that knowledge comes the responsibility to live more fully, more intentionally, and more compassionately. As we ponder life after death, we're really reflecting on how to live. Death gives meaning to life. It reminds us that every moment is precious, and it's up to us to make those moments count. The comfort of mystery. There's something profoundly comforting in the mystery of life after death. It's the great unknown, a question that will always keep us searching for answers, keep us wondering, keep us dreaming. Perhaps, the mystery is not something to solve but something to embrace. Maybe it's the uncertainty that makes life so precious, and the uncertainty of death that drives us to live with purpose. It's the unknown that pushes us to seek love, connection, and meaning in every corner of our lives. Conclusion: embracing the mystery. As we wrap up this exploration, I want to leave you with a question. How does the mystery of life after death shape your life? Does it inspire you to live more fully? Does it comfort you in times of loss? Or does it simply leave you with more questions? Whatever your perspective is, remember this: death is not the end. It's a continuation, not just for the person who's passed, but for those of us still here. The journey doesn't stop when the body gives out. It's a mystery that continues to unfold, and it's one that keeps us asking, searching, and growing. As we finish, I hope you'll take a moment to reflect on your own beliefs and the way you approach life, knowing that one day, when our time comes, the mystery will continue. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the first 7 days after death. What do you believe happens when we die? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.